Guys, tell me about something so terrifying that happened to you, something you still can't forget? Posted by Seasters.lol. When I moved into my new apartment, the landlord gave me one rule: never use the staircase to the fourth floor. He didn't explain why, and I didn't press him. For months I ignored it, taking the elevator like everyone else. But one night the elevator was out of order. I had groceries, and the thought of walking up 4 flights with heavy bags annoyed me. So, I decided to break the rule. The staircase was dimly lit with peeling paint and a faint smell of mildew. As I climbed, I noticed something odd. The steps between the 3rd and 4th floors seemed to stretch longer than the others. When I finally reached the landing, I froze. The hallway was wrong. Too dark, too quiet. The walls were covered in scratches and every door was slightly ajar. I turned to go back, but the stairs were gone. Behind me, one of the doors creaked open wider. A shadow moved inside. I don't remember how I got out. All I know is that I woke up in my bed, shaking and drenched in sweat. The next day, the elevator was working again. I haven't taken the stairs since. Posted by Dweller, 22. When my grandparents passed away, my family inherited their old farmhouse. It had been in the family for generations, but no one had lived there full-time in decades. I volunteered to move in temporarily while we decided what to do with it. The house was charming but creaky, with a draft that seemed to come from nowhere. One thing that always unsettled me was the basement door. It was locked, and no one had the key. My dad said his parents always kept it that way, claiming it was full of junk. One evening, curiosity got the better of me. I found an old set of keys in my grandparents' bedroom, and one of them fit the lock. When I opened the door, a cold, musty smell hit me. The basement was dark, with a single flickering light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The space was cluttered with old furniture, broken toys, and dusty boxes, but in the corner there was something strange: a circle of salt on the floor. Inside the circle was a small wooden box. The box had carvings I didn't recognize, and when I picked it up, I felt an odd warmth radiating from it. Inside was a bundle of blackened, brittle hair and what looked like a small bone. I quickly put it back and decided to leave the basement alone. That night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps above me. I assumed it was the creaky house, but then I heard the floorboards in my bedroom creak. Something was in the room with me. I turned on the light, but nothing was there. The next morning, I went back to the basement to put the box back in the circle. But the salt was gone, and the box was open. I moved out the same day. Posted by Skater, 1980. I live in a small apartment building, and for years, I had a quiet neighbor named Mrs. Adler. She was in her late 70s, always polite, but kept to herself. I'd see her watering her plants or getting her mail, and we'd exchange a wave. One day, I realized I hadn't seen her in weeks. Her mailbox was overflowing, and her plants were dying. I asked the landlord about her, but he shrugged, saying she must have moved out. That didn't make sense. Mrs. Adler had told me she'd lived there for decades and had no family to speak of. I decided to check on her apartment. The door was slightly ajar, which was strange because it always used to be locked. Inside, it was like she'd vanished. Her furniture was covered in dust, and her belongings were still there. It was as if she'd just walked out and never returned. Then I noticed something chilling. On her kitchen table was a photograph of the building, taken from the outside. In the photo, every window was dark except one, her own. Standing in the window was a blurry figure that looked just like her. I reported it to the landlord, but when we went back to her apartment, the photo was gone. I moved out a month later. Posted by Tom Rider 0. I work late shifts, so I often take the midnight bus home. It's usually empty, and the driver and I exchange nods as I board. But one night, something felt off. The bus was unusually full, but the passengers were silent. No one was on their phones or reading. They all just stared straight ahead. As I sat down, I noticed something even stranger. Their faces looked blank, almost like masks. I tried not to stare, but when I glanced at the woman sitting across from me, her head slowly turned toward me. Her eyes were hollow. I froze, gripping the seat in front of me as she opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The bus stopped suddenly, and the driver turned to me. He was the only normal-looking person on board. "This is your stop," he said, even though we weren't at my usual stop. I bolted off the bus, and as it drove away, I looked back. The passengers were all pressed against the windows, staring at me. I never took the night bus again. Posted by Exporter 11. My friends and I love camping, so when we heard about a hidden forest trail outside of town, we decided to check it out. The directions were vague, but after some searching, we found a narrow path leading into the woods. The forest was dense with towering trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. It felt untouched, like no one had been there in years. As we walked, we noticed strange things. Carvings on the trees, bundles of sticks tied with red string, and even an old rusted swing set in the middle of nowhere. By the time we realized we were lost, the sun was setting. We tried retracing our steps, but the path seemed to change. Landmarks we'd passed earlier were gone, replaced by unfamiliar trees. Then we heard it. A low, guttural humming sound. It seemed to come from all around us, growing louder with every step. We broke into a run, desperate to find our way out. That's when we saw the figure. It was tall and thin, with glowing eyes that followed us as we ran. Eventually, we stumbled out of the forest, gasping for air. When we looked back, the trail was gone. We reported it to the local authorities, but they said no such trail or forest existed in that area. Posted by Andy Glock 9. When I moved into my new apartment, I was told I'd be sharing it with another tenant. Her name was Claire, but she was rarely home. Her bedroom door was always closed, and I never saw her leave or enter. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have our own schedules, right? But strange things started happening. I'd hear faint whispers coming from her room at night, even though the lights were always off. One evening, I decided to knock on her door to introduce myself properly. There was no response, but I could hear movement inside, light footsteps like someone pacing. The next morning, I asked the landlord about her. He looked confused and said, "Claire moved out months ago." I didn't believe him. That night, I heard the whispers again, so I decided to open her door. The room was empty, no bed, no furniture, nothing. But on the wall, there were scratches, dozens of them, as if someone had clawed at the paint. And in the corner, written in tiny, shaky letters, were the words, "Still here." I moved out the next day. Posted by Nastic. When my aunt passed away, she left me her old house. It wasn't much, just a small, creaky place on the outskirts of town, but I decided to move in while saving for my own. The house was filled with antiques, most of them harmless except for the mirror in the attic. The first time I saw it, I felt uneasy. It was massive, with an ornate gold frame covered in strange carvings. The glass itself had a faintly distorted quality, as if it wasn't reflecting the room correctly. At first, I left it alone, but I started noticing small things out of place. A chair would move slightly, or I'd find books scattered on the floor when I hadn't touched them. I chalked it up to the house settling or my own forgetfulness. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard something shatter. I rushed upstairs to find the mirror cracked, a jagged line running down the center. But what caught my attention was the reflection. It didn't match the room. In the mirror, the attic was darker, with shadows that seemed to move. And in the corner, where there should have been nothing, stood a figure, a tall, thin man with hollow eyes. He didn't move, but his gaze was fixed on me. I ran out of the attic and locked the door. The next day, I called a local junk removal service to take the mirror away, but when they arrived, the mirror was gone. I still hear footsteps in the attic at night. Posted by Custard1177. A few months ago, I started getting strange calls late at night. They always came around 2:37 a.m., and the number was blocked. At first, I ignored them, assuming it was a prank or telemarketer, but the calls didn't stop. When I finally answered, there was no voice on the other end, just static. Then, after a long pause, a whisper, "I'm here." I hung up immediately and tried to go back to sleep, but the calls kept coming. Every night, the same static, the same whisper. Sometimes the voice would say different things. Look outside, or check the closet. One night, after weeks of this, I decided to confront whoever was behind it. I answered the call and shouted, "Who is this? What do you want?" The static grew louder, almost deafening, before the voice said, "Behind you." I froze, too scared to turn around. When I finally worked up the courage, there was no one there. But the next morning I found muddy footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom. I changed my number and moved to a new apartment. The calls stopped, at least for now.
Posted by airlouder_22. I used to work the night shift at a small office. It wasn't a glamorous job, just data entry and some light administrative work. The building was ancient, with flickering fluorescent lights and an HVAC system that groaned like it was alive. Most nights, I was the only one there. One night, as I typed away, I heard something. At first, I thought it was the usual creaks and groans of the old building. But this sound was different. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like scratching. I turned off my music and strained to listen. It was coming from the vents. I told myself it was probably a rat or some other pest. The building wasn't exactly pest-free, but the sound was persistent. Scratch, scratch. It seemed to travel through the ducts, moving closer to my desk. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was nothing. But then I heard breathing, not heavy or labored, but shallow and rhythmic, like someone trying to stay quiet. My heart started racing. I stood up and shined my phone flashlight into the vent above me. Nothing. But the sound didn't stop. It was moving again, heading toward the break room. I grabbed a heavy stapler. Ridiculous, I know, but it was all I had, and followed the noise. When I reached the break room, the vent cover was on the floor, and the scratching had stopped. I stared at the dark opening in the wall, feeling a cold draft blow past me. That's when I saw it. A hand, pale, with long, thin fingers, gripping the edge of the vent. I froze as a face emerged. It was gaunt and expressionless, with eyes that seemed too large for its skull. It stared at me for a moment before retreating into the darkness of the duct. I sprinted out of the office, leaving my belongings behind. The next morning, I told my boss what happened. He laughed it off, saying I was probably just tired. But when I insisted he check the security footage, his expression changed. The cameras showed me sitting at my desk, but in the background, something moved, something crawling through the vents. I quit that job the same day. Posted by Nightwatcher332. When I moved into my new apartment, the cable package came with an old, outdated TV. I didn't think much of it. I mostly used my laptop to stream shows anyway. But one night, while unpacking, I decided to turn it on to see what channels it got. Most of the channels were either blank or full of static, but one caught my attention. Channel 56. At first, it was just more static, but as I stared, shapes began to emerge. A room dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. There was no sound at first, just the faint hum of static. Then a figure appeared on screen. It was a man sitting in a chair, his face obscured by shadows. He didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, staring at the camera. I thought it was some kind of art project or a bad horror movie, but when I tried to change the channel, the remote wouldn't work. The power button didn't either. The man on the screen leaned forward as if he could see me. My heart skipped a beat when he raised his hand and waved. I unplugged the TV, and the screen went black. Relieved, I went to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. I felt like I was being watched all night. The next morning, The TV was on again, tuned to channel 56. The man was still there, but now he was standing. Behind him, in the flickering light, I could see something. Photos pinned to the wall. They were pictures of me.
Posted by Ostian Rocks. I've lived in the same house my whole life. It's an old Victorian that's been in my family for generations. I thought I knew every creak, every corner. But last month I discovered something I can't explain. It started when I was cleaning out the attic. I noticed a small locked door tucked behind some old boxes. I'd never seen it before. The key was still in the lock, so I turned it, curious to see what was inside. The door opened to a narrow staircase leading downward. I was confused. There shouldn't have been anything below the attic, just the second floor. But the staircase was there, so I descended, flashlight in hand. The air grew colder as I went down, the steps creaking under my weight. At the bottom was a room. It was small and circular, with walls covered in faded, peeling wallpaper. A single chair sat in the center, and on the floor was a doll, dirty, with its head twisted at an unnatural angle. The room felt wrong, like it didn't belong. I turned to go back up the stairs, but the door at the top was gone. Panic set in as I ran my hands over the wall where the door should have been. Then I heard it, whispering. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, coming from the chair. I turned back, and the doll was no longer on the floor. It was sitting in the chair, its lifeless eyes staring at me. I screamed, banging on the walls, begging for someone to hear me. And then, just as suddenly as it had disappeared, the door reappeared. I scrambled up the stairs and slammed it shut behind me. When I told my family about the room, they looked at me like I was crazy. I went back to the attic the next day, but the door was gone. Sometimes, though, at night I hear whispers coming from above. Posted by Nicked Hiker 23. I love hiking alone. There's something peaceful about being surrounded by nature, away from the noise of the world. But my last trip to the woods changed everything. I was deep into the trail when I noticed something strange. The forest was silent. No birds, no insects, just an eerie stillness. I shrugged it off and kept walking until I reached a clearing where I planned to set up camp. That's when I saw it. In the distance, between the trees, was a figure. It was too far away to make out any details, but it was tall, unnaturally tall. I waved, thinking it might be another hiker, but it didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. Feeling uneasy, I decided to move further down the trail. Every so often I'd glance back, and it would still be there, standing motionless, always at the edge of my vision. Night fell, and I set up camp as quickly as possible. I tried to convince myself that I was just imagining things, but the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my tent. They were slow and deliberate, circling my camp. I held my breath, clutching my knife, too terrified to move. When the footsteps stopped, I peeked out of the tent. The figure was closer now, standing just at the edge of the clearing. Its face was pale, featureless, and its body seemed to blend with the shadows. I didn't sleep that night. At the first light of dawn, I packed up and ran back to my car. I haven't been hiking since. Posted by Phantom91. When I moved into my new apartment, the landlord gave me one rule: never use the staircase to the 4th floor. He didn't explain why, and I didn't press him. For months I ignored it, taking the elevator like everyone else. But one night, the elevator was out of order. I had groceries, and the thought of walking up 4 flights with heavy bags annoyed me, so I decided to break the rule. The staircase was dimly lit, with peeling paint and a faint smell of mildew. As I climbed, I noticed something odd. The steps between the 3rd and 4th floors seemed to stretch longer than the others. When I finally reached the landing, I froze. The hallway was wrong. Too dark, too quiet. The walls were covered in scratches, and every door was slightly ajar. I turned to go back, but the stairs were gone. Behind me, one of the doors creaked open wider. A shadow moved inside. I don't remember how I got out. All I know is that I woke up in my bed, shaking and drenched in sweat. The next day, the elevator was working again. I haven't taken the stairs since. Posted by ArtPetchy626. Okay, you guys, this is like the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me. I'm not even joking. So, I've lived in this old house my whole life, right? It's one of those houses that's been in the family for generations. And honestly, I thought I knew every single little detail about the place. Every creak, every corner, every tiny noise. But, I was so wrong. It's crazy. So, here's the deal. I'm up in the attic one day, just cleaning some junk, when I noticed this little door behind a stack of old boxes. And I swear to God, I've never seen this door before in my life. It was tucked away or something, and I'm just staring at it what the heck is this? I mean, I thought I knew every inch of this house, but nope. So, naturally, I'm okay, let's see what's behind this thing. I kid you not, I turn the key in the lock and open the door, and there's this narrow staircase going down. And I'm just standing there wait, hold up, this doesn't make sense. There's nothing below the attic, it's just the second floor. But, the staircase is literally there, so what am I supposed to do? Just leave it? Hell no. I grab my phone, turn on the flashlight, and start descending. The air gets colder and colder the further I go, and the stairs are creaking under my weight like they're about to collapse. It's just weird. So, I get to the bottom and there's this tiny circular room, and I swear it felt wrong. I can't even explain it. The walls are all peeling paint and faded wallpaper. There's a single chair in the middle of the room, and on the floor, there's this creepy doll, and its head is twisted way too far. Honestly, it was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. But the worst part? It felt like the room didn't belong. I was standing there this is messed up, I need to get out of here. So I turned to head back up the stairs, but the door at the top is gone. Poof, vanished. And now I'm just freaking out how? There's no door. I'm pounding on the walls trying to find something. Anything. And then I hear it. A whisper. At first it's barely there, but it gets louder, and I can hear it coming from the chair. I turn around and you won't believe this. The doll is gone. It's sitting in the chair now. I'm just staring at it this is not happening. This is not real. I'm honestly losing it at this point. I start banging on the walls, screaming for someone to hear me. But of course no one's there. And just as suddenly as the door disappeared, it's back. As if nothing ever happened. I don't even know how to explain it, but I bolted out of there so fast. I got out of that attic and slammed the door behind me, and honestly, I haven't been back since. The worst part? I told my family and they just looked at me like I was crazy. I went back up there the next day to see if the door was still there, but it was gone again. And now sometimes at night, I hear whispers from above. Yeah, that's fun. Posted by One Smile Matters. Okay, so this is going to sound nuts, but hear me out. You know that feeling when you get a new place and you're all excited about all the little things, right? Well, I moved into this apartment and it came with this super old TV. I didn't think much of it, I mostly stream stuff on my laptop. But anyway, one night I was unpacking and figured, hey, let's see what channels this thing gets. So I turned the thing on, and surprise, surprise, most of the channels are either blank or just pure static. But then, one channel caught my eye. Channel 56. At first it was just more static, but then I noticed something weird. Shapes started to form on the screen. A room, dimly lit. It was really strange. And then this figure appeared on the screen. Just sitting there. A guy sitting in a chair, his face hidden in shadows. He wasn't moving, wasn't saying anything. Just staring at the camera. And at first I thought, okay, this is some weird art project or a bad horror flick or something. But then I tried to change the channel and the remote wasn't working. The TV wasn't responding. And then the dude leans forward. I swear to God, he looks right at me. And he raises his hand and waved at me. I did the only thing I could do. I unplugged the TV. I'm not even joking. The screen went black, and I just sat there, trying to convince myself I hadn't just lost my mind. But that night, sleep didn't come. I kept feeling like I was being watched, the whole night. So the next morning I wake up and guess what? The TV is on again, and it's tuned to channel 56. The guy is still there, but now he's standing. And behind him, in the flickering light, I swear to God I saw it. Photos. Photos pinned to the wall. And they were pictures of me. Posted by Large Meat Products. There's an abandoned playground in my neighborhood, fenced off and overgrown with weeds. It's been there for decades, but no one ever talks about it. One night my friends and I decided to check it out, armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure. The playground was eerie. The swings creaked in the wind, and the merry-go-round was rusted and bent. But the strangest thing was the slide. It was covered in strange symbols, etched deep into the metal. As we explored, we heard a faint giggle. It wasn't one of us. We turned our flashlights toward the sound, but there was nothing there. Then the merry-go-round started to spin on its own. We were all frozen in place as it picked up speed, faster and faster until it was a blur. Then it stopped abruptly, and we heard the giggle again, louder this time. Something was on the slide. A shadowy figure, small and hunched, slid down and landed at the bottom. It didn't move, just sat there staring at us. We ran and didn't look back. The next day we went to check if the symbols were still there. They were gone, but the slide was covered in fresh handprints. Posted by Spearsord. I work the night shift at a hospital, and strange things happen all the time. Lights flicker, monitors beep for no reason, and patients sometimes talk about visitors that no one else can see. But the scariest thing happened to me in the elevator. It was around 3 a.m., and I was heading to the basement to grab supplies. The elevator was old and slow, and as it descended, it jolted to a stop between floors. The lights flickered, plunging me into darkness for a few seconds before the emergency lights came on. I hit the button for the next floor, but the elevator didn't move. Then I noticed something on the security camera feed in the corner of the elevator. The camera showed the inside of the elevator, but there was someone standing behind me. A man in a hospital gown, his face pale and sunken. I spun around, but the elevator was empty. When I turned back to the camera, he was closer, standing right behind me. The elevator jolted again and started moving, and the image on the camera disappeared. When I reached the basement, I ran out and refused to use that elevator again. I later found out that a patient had died in that elevator years ago, trapped when it malfunctioned. Posted by Robo J. Bird. There's a lake near my childhood home that my parents always told me to stay away from. They said it was dangerous, but they never explained why. As a teenager, I ignored their warnings and went there with a group of friends. The water was still, almost unnaturally so, and the air was thick with the smell of algae. We dared each other to swim, and I was the first to dive in. The water was freezing, but that wasn't the worst part. As I swam, I felt something brush against my leg. At first I thought it was a fish, but then it happened again. Something cold and slimy wrapping around my ankle. I screamed and swam back to shore, but when I looked down, there were bruises around my leg, like someone had grabbed me. That night I had a nightmare about the lake. I was standing on the shore, and a figure emerged from the water. Its face was bloated, its eyes milky and lifeless. It reached out to me, whispering, "Come back." I woke up sweating and decided to tell my parents. That's when they finally told me the truth. Years ago, a boy had drowned in the lake and his body was never recovered. I've never been back, but sometimes I hear the whispers in my dreams. Come back. Posted by Shakabra530. Okay, so this is where it gets really weird. I love hiking alone. I mean, there's something just so peaceful about being out in nature, right? But let me tell you, this last trip I took, it was so messed up. So I'm out there deep in the forest and it's totally quiet. Like way too quiet. No birds, no insects, just this eerie silence. And at first I'm like, whatever, maybe it's just a quiet day. But then I reach this clearing, and I'm about to set up camp when I see something. In the distance, between the trees, there's this figure. It's tall, like way taller than any normal person. I wave, thinking it might be another hiker, but it just stands there, not moving, not even acknowledging me. It's just watching. So I keep walking, but every time I look back, it's still there. Just standing, not moving, not even blinking. And I'm like, okay, this is weird. I'm gonna keep going. But the whole time I feel like something's off. So night falls and I set up my camp as fast as possible. I'm trying not to freak out, but I keep feeling like I'm being watched. Around midnight, I hear footsteps outside my tent. Slow, deliberate footsteps. They're circling my camp, and I'm just laying there, holding my knife, too scared to move. When the footsteps stop, I peek outside, and I see it. It's the figure, standing at the edge of the clearing, only now it's closer. Its face is pale, featureless, and it just stands there, blending with the shadows. I didn't sleep a wink that night. At first light, I packed up and ran back to my car as fast as I could. Haven't been hiking since. Posted by Notermoms Vark Spaghetti. Yo, this is some crazy stuff. I just moved into this new apartment and my landlord told me one rule. Never use the staircase to the 4th floor. He didn't explain why. And honestly, I thought he was just being weird. So of course I didn't think much about it. But then, one day, the elevator broke. And I had groceries and I was like, nah, I'm not lugging all this stuff up 4 flights of stairs. So I figured, screw it, I'll just use the stairs. So I'm climbing up and I notice something's a little off. The stairs between the 3rd and 4th floors seem longer than the others. Like, what's up with that? When I get to the landing, it's wrong. The hallway's too dark, too quiet. The walls are scratched up and every door is slightly open. I turn around to leave, but the stairs are gone. Just vanished. And then, one of the doors creaks open. You guys, I didn't stick around to figure out what was inside. I don't even remember how I got out of there, but somehow, I ended up back in my bed, covered in sweat. The next day, the elevator was working again. Haven't taken, posted by fucking young blood. Okay guys, this is hands down one of the creepiest things that ever happened to me. It all started when I moved into this old apartment building in the city. The rent was crazy cheap, which should have been my first red flag, right? But I was desperate. The building was old, but not falling apart or anything. Just kind of weird. You know those buildings that feel like they have a history? I don't know, I can't explain it. So one night I'm coming home from work, and as I'm walking up the stairs to my apartment, I hear footsteps behind me. But when I turn around, no one's there. I figure it's just my mind playing tricks, so I continue walking. But the footsteps keep following me. It's not like someone's trying to sneak up behind me. It's like they're exactly in sync with my movements. Every time I step, I hear another step. It's so eerie. I get to my door and turn the handle, but then I hear the footsteps stop right behind me. I'm freaking out now. I turn around and there's no one there, not a single soul. I rush inside my apartment, lock the door, and try to shake it off. But the next night it happens again. And the next, and the next. Same exact thing. I decide to leave a little earlier to see if I can catch whoever is messing with me. But when I get to the stairs, I realize something horrible. The footsteps aren't coming from behind me anymore. They're coming from above. I can't explain it. Every time I go up the stairs, it feels like something's following me from behind. But when I look up, there's always a shadow moving just out of the corner of my eye. Every time. I ended up moving out after a couple of weeks, but I swear, I hear those footsteps sometimes, even when I'm alone at home. They're in my head now, always behind me. Posted by Rex 1991. This happened a few years ago when I lived in a row of townhouses. It wasn't a bad neighborhood or anything, but there was one neighbor that was a little off. Let's call him Greg. Greg was always home. I never saw him leave, but his lights were always on, and there was something weird about the way he looked out his window. It started innocently enough. I'd see him standing at the window, staring out at the street or into his yard. But the thing is, he'd do it for hours. He'd just stand there, not moving, not blinking, just staring. It was like he was waiting for something. Or someone. At first, I thought maybe it was just a weird habit. But then one night I was coming back home late, around midnight, and I saw Greg standing at his window again. But this time he wasn't looking out into the yard. He was looking directly at me. I froze. There was no way he could have seen me, right? I was across the street and it was dark. But he was staring directly at me, unblinking. I quickly hurried inside, trying to shake off the weird feeling in my chest. Over the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. I'd catch glimpses of him standing in the window when I walked by, always at the same time of day. He'd never move. Not once. One night, I decided to confront him. I knocked on his door, but no one answered. The lights were on, so I knew someone was home. I went around the back to check the window, and that's when I saw it. He was standing there, just like usual. But this time, his mouth was open. He was smiling. A creepy, wide smile that didn't look natural at all. I moved out a week later. Haven't seen Greg since, but I swear I can still feel him watching me sometimes. Posted by Rocky the Boxer. This is something that happened to me when I was on a camping trip with a couple of my friends in the woods. I know. Camping sounds like a disaster waiting to happen, and this is definitely the kind of story that's proof of that. So we're out in the middle of nowhere, just having a good time, roasting marshmallows, drinking some beer. It was just before dark when we noticed this strange light coming from the trees. At first, we thought maybe it was a flashlight or some other campers, but it was way too high up in the trees. It was just floating there. We all thought it was weird, but no one was brave enough to go check it out. Then, as the night went on, the light moved. It wasn't some random flash or a reflection. This thing was definitely moving through the trees. One of my buddies, Brad, is the type to not back down from anything, so he decided he was going to go find out what it was. He grabbed a flashlight, and we followed him at a distance, laughing it off. But as we got closer, the light started getting brighter. And then, we heard something. It wasn't just the normal sounds of the forest. There was this humming noise. It was like a low, constant buzz, like some giant mechanical thing was operating just out of sight. Brad reached the light first, and when he did, he stopped dead in his tracks. We all caught up to him, and we saw it too. There was nothing there. No light. No trees. Just emptiness. It was like the woods had swallowed it whole. We left immediately and didn't speak about it again, but every time I go into the woods now, I can still hear that hum. Posted by Propeller. You know those houses where everything is just a little off, but you can't put your finger on it? That's how my family's house was. It was old, sure, but it had this weird atmosphere. The worst part? The basement. I swear to God I could feel something down there. Every time I passed the basement door, I just got this weird chill. I'd hear things too, scratching noises, like something was trying to get out. But I was never brave enough to open that door. My mom always said it was just the pipes or the house settling. Whatever. One night I'm home alone and I hear it. The sound of the basement door creaking. I go to check and the door's wide open. I don't know why, but I walk down there. As I step down the stairs, I can hear something. Footsteps right behind me. I rush down to the bottom of the stairs and the light flickers on. And then I see it. There's a door at the far end of the basement that I've never noticed before. It was just there. It wasn't locked. I opened it, and what I saw still haunts me. A room. A small, empty room with nothing in it but a chair. And in the chair, a figure. A person, sitting there, staring at me. But they were completely still. They didn't move, didn't blink. I ran up the stairs so fast I almost tripped over my own feet. I haven't been down there since, and I've never told anyone about it. But every now and then, I hear the basement door creak open again. Posted by Plax1780. Okay, here's the thing. I've always been a skeptic. I didn't believe in ghosts, spirits, or anything like that. But after this, well, I'm not so sure anymore. So, I'm staying at my friend's house for the weekend. It's a nice house, not too big but cozy. We're watching movies, having a good time when my friend tells me about this weird thing that's been happening. She says that sometimes, late at night, she feels like someone's watching her. I laugh it off, but she gets serious. She says she's heard footsteps in the hallway when she's home alone, and sometimes she wakes up to see the door to her room slightly ajar, even though she always closes it when she goes to bed. That night, I stay in her guest room. At first, everything's fine, but around 3 a.m., I wake up to the sound of footsteps outside the door. I look out into the hallway, but I don't see anything. I lie back down trying to sleep, but then I hear it again. The footsteps are getting closer, closer. And then, the door starts to open, just a crack. I get up thinking it's my friend, but when I open the door, no one's there. I stayed awake the rest of the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was standing just outside my door.